This is Facets of Connection, where we are transforming relationships within an evolving world. Brought to you by Relational Life Foundation and hosted by me, Sarah Melissa Oswald. This exclusive podcast series delves into the heart of human connection, exploring how we learn, love, and collaborate within a dynamic society. We'll uncover the power of respectful relationships and their essential role in the human experience. I invite you to embark on a journey with me to create a more connected, empathic world for future generations. I'm delighted today to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Caron Starobin. Caron and I connected through our shared passion for relational life therapy, and her work on neurodiversity within intimate relationships has been extremely popular as a topic within our programming at Relational Life Foundation. Caron is the owner and clinical director of a vibrant group therapy practice. She is certified as a relational life therapist and is a skilled facilitator of the RLT relationship boot camps. Beyond her clinical practice, Caron serves as a trainer at the Relational Life Institute, guiding new students who are working toward their own certification in RLT. But to me, what makes Caron's work truly special is the way she models real connection. She teaches what it means to be relational, simply by being who she is. At least that's been my experience of her. She is authentic, caring, has healthy boundaries, and seems to have a solid sense of self-esteem, which are all tenets of relational life therapy. Caron comes with a neurodiversity affirming perspective, reminding us that understanding the ways brains and people differ benefits every single one of us. It's truly an honor to have her on this podcast today. So Caron, welcome. I would love to dive right in. So I'm wondering if you could share a bit about what's been top of mind for you as we've been leading up to this interview.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I've been noticing that a lot of practitioners ask questions about how to work with couples who are neurodiverse, especially if one person is, let's say, autistic or has ADHD, and they have differences in communication. And how can two people who have such different ways of perceiving things in the world actually be able to be in relationship with one another in a way that's healthy and satisfying? The word is satisfying to both people. And that's what I've been thinking a lot about lately. And I don't really know the answer to that. What I do know is that what's helpful is to be able to open up a space where two people who are in a neurodiverse relationship, meaning at least one person is neurodivergent and the other one may be neurotypical, that they can explore that in a way that is relatively emotionally safe. Nobody's going to be attacking anyone else or judging. And RLT has helped me be able to do that in a way that also addresses the trauma that informs the relationship dynamics at the same time. So it's not just about the way the cognitive functioning or the way the brain is working, but also the history, the family of origin history that also informs that both pieces are important. And I don't know the answer. I don't know if any two people who come into my office can be satisfied. To me, the neurodiverse piece can add a layer of complexity, but doesn't necessarily, because everyone seems complex to me. So that's what I've been thinking a lot about. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think a lot about satisfying relationships as well. Satisfaction is one of the words I use in my personal work outside of Relational Life Foundation. On my own website, you'll find that word sprinkled throughout. And it's a great question. Can any relationship be truly satisfying? Do we need to be fully seen and understood to feel satisfaction
Yes, that is
in
the
intimacy?
question.
And I imagine, neurodiversity does add a
Mm-hmm.
layer of complexity
Exactly.
there.
And I'm just thinking of a few couples I'm working with lately that the differences in their communication needs, where like one person really needs a lot of quiet and space to be able to think, and the other person is a little more fast paced. And so they question, can we really do this? Can we be in a relationship where we have such differences in how we communicate or how we understand or perceive the world? I don't know. I think there's a lot that goes into creating a satisfying relationship.
I agree with you. And I'm laughing because that particular dynamic shows up in my household. And I don't think either my husband or I would identify as
Mm-hmm.
neurodiverse, but he has a much deeper need for quiet. And I'm a chatterbox. And he's like, can you
Yes.
please stop talking? I'm thinking over here, you know? And, there's a quote that you had included
Mm-hmm.
in a slide deck for that community
Mm-hmm.
conversation that you presented called No Ordinary Love. And the quote came from
Mm-hmm.
Judy Singer.
Mm-hmm.
You know this quote? She said, humans inhabit Earth, and just as we are part of the biodiverse planet, we are all neurodiverse. Just as we all live in a biosphere, we all live in a neurosphere. And I don't know if that applies here, Caron, but maybe you can speak to it. Why did you include that? To me, it says we're all different, right? All of our brains operate differently.
Saying that if you're neurodivergent, your brain is diverging from what is considered in culture and society as typical. We have very limited language. And in
Got
that
it.
in that quote, what Judy Singer was saying is that
That's
everyone is really differently wired. And if we think of it that way, we don't have to separate ourselves out so much. We are all differently wired. We have different ways of thinking, different cognitive functioning. And what she's really saying is however you're wired, however you're wired, it doesn't make you better or worse than someone else. There are people I just don't want to minimize, so folks who are, say, autistic but have profound autism, or they're significantly impacted in terms of their level of functioning. And what Judy would probably say to that, I'm not Judy, but what I would think how she would apply that quote is that makes that they suffer. They have things in their life that are very challenging. Maybe they don't have relationships in the same way that someone who doesn't suffer or struggle as much does, but they're not any worse than or better than anybody else. They're just differently wired. And that's what she was trying to get at, is that this idea that there's sort of one brain that is the right brain, that is the correct brain, that's what she was fighting against. That's what she was pushing against when she was saying that.
I'm with her on that. And I really get that if we say, well, everybody is neurodiverse, then it minimizes the people who really suffer and
Mm-hmm.
have struggled to communicate what it is that their
Mm-hmm.
brain is doing that's different
Mm-hmm.
than
Mm-hmm.
their partners,
It's
for
very
instance,
tricky.
or how to navigate the world
Yeah,
if you're really up
it's
against it.
very
It is very
tricky.
tricky.
And I like to say up front that because I feel that language is limited, if I have to identify, I identify as neurotypical, because when I look back at my childhood or growing up into my young adulthood, I don't have any experiences that I can recall where I felt that I was different. I meant it when I said the more I learn, the more I feel I don't know. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean that I find that the whole concept of neurodiversity is evolving. So it feels like it's changing all the time. And so then I'm like, I don't know. Do I know anything? I mean, it just feels that way.
Since we do have this amazing community conversation that you presented back in 2022, I think it was, that
Yeah,
has
it
been
was.
the most popular community conversation to date. There has been so much interest in this. And what it illuminated for me is how many of us identify in some way or another as neurodiverse. And I imagine that has many definitions. And so I
Mm-hmm.
would encourage our listeners to go check that out if you want to access that. And I
Right.
hope that this conversation can sort of build upon that. And so I was wondering if there's anything that you've learned in the last 2.5 years that you
Yeah.
feel is like an upgraded way of thinking about all of this in your
Yeah,
practice.
that's a great question. When I and Sarah Wayland and Libby Sinback did No Ordinary Love community conversations, we were really focused on helping people understand how ableism can play out in a neurodiverse couple where, again, one person may be neurodivergent, the other may be identifying as neurotypical, or both people are neurodivergent. That's what would describe a neurodiverse couple. And now, where I am, where I've grown or taken things, is I am a super relational life therapy geek for sure. And I've just been so excited to be able to apply relational life therapy to the work I do with neurodiverse couples that what I've really been focusing on is why is RLT a model that seems to really work well? Why is that? And that's what I've been focusing on, trying to answer that question. And I do have a few answers to that. I mean, I do feel like I've learned some things about that, if you want to know
So
about
that
it.
RLT is a particularly useful model when working with neurodiverse couples.
Yes, I
Say
think there's
more.
some,
What have you
yeah.
found out? What have you discovered?
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, because RLT is based in this idea of sort of naming patriarchy, working in the couple system, it's fundamentally looking at this idea of no one person in the system of the relationship is better than or worse than the other. And so that just lends itself to working with neurodiverse couples because you can talk about that in terms of patriarchy, but also in terms of other things like ableism or ism, really, racism. So it helps to have that as the foundation of we're really looking at here how are you as a couple, who's one up, who's one down, how is that playing out? And how is that adding to, contributing to the ruptures in your relationship? And now we add, oh, maybe somebody's neurodivergent. How does that add to the better than or worse than complex that might be going on? That's one of the fundamental reasons why, in my view, I think RLT really lends itself to working with neurodiverse couples because you can actually name that. It's part of the model. Does
Yes.
that make, yeah?
Well, it's part of the model for sure, but I would imagine you could name it no matter what model you're using. And
You say that, Sarah, but I don't know about that. I'm not an expert in all the couples therapy models, so I don't want to pretend to be. But I know enough to know that every model has some kind of sort of fundamental foundation that it pushes off of.
uh-huh.
And not all of the models push off of this idea of breaking down better than or worse than and looking at that as a really important piece. Not all the
That's true.
models do
It
that.
truly is fundamental to every single aspect of RLT, isn't it?
Yes. And so
That
I don't
no
think
human being could possibly be better or worse than another.
it's really a big part of the model. It's a foundational
Yeah.
piece. And I really am not saying that other models don't look at that, but that's not fundamental to other models. There are other things that are fundamental to other models. So the neurodivergence that I'm most experienced with is autism and more of what I refer to as either the subtle presentation of autism or a less obvious presentation of autism is more of where I've done my work. And I think that RLT, by using the lenses it used, like the 8 lenses, right? And I want to add, but it hasn't been any discussion about this yet, but I'd like there to be a ninth lens that's called the neurobiology lens.
I
And,
love it.
but those
Well, our audience
lenses,
doesn't necessarily know anything about the 8 lenses of
right,
RLT,
right, right, right.
just so you know.
So the ways that we gather data is through these lenses, and the ways that we gather data really allows for us to be looking at if we're looking at what are the losing strategies, for instance, what is going on in the couple where those strategies are leading to disconnection instead of connection. That's a basic top high level question. And then we start looking at these ways that might not help us be connected, like unbridled self expression or a need to be right. If you add in the layer of looking at cognitive functioning and communication and perception and sensory issues. Then you can look at, well, wait, are those losing strategies, are they just born out of trauma, or are they also born out of differently wired brains and different levels of different kinds of cognitive functioning? And then how does that change the way you're going to talk about these differences, and how is it going to change the way you're going to attend to them? When I talk to other RLT couples therapists and other family therapists or people who do relational work, they don't necessarily aren't looking at that. It's a layer that can be missed because I will speak it to my own profession as a social worker. You know, the training focuses on, like, especially in family systems work, you're focusing on family of origin trauma. So everything that you see is rooted in trauma. That's why I think it's not so obvious that people are looking at that layer of how are you perceiving, and, like, if you have ADHD, for instance, how does that impulsivity, if that's your issue, impact the way that you approach your partner, not just the trauma, but also the impulsivity, and how do those intersect?
That makes a lot of sense. And if you're only looking at it through a lens of trauma, some of the same symptoms might show up, and you could imagine or make up that they are trauma responses.
Yes.
Uh-huh. But it might actually just be like, "Oh, no, I was just born this way."
Well, and what I've found is that it's never one or the other. There's always an intersection, and that's what I think is interesting is, oh, how does it make us look at this differently if we recognize it as an intersection, not as one or the other?
Hmm. Oh, I'm just imagining a little kid who's neurodiverse, whose parents may have treated them differently because they might not have understood what their kiddo was dealing with,
Mhm.
and maybe trauma came out of that alone.
That's who I see in my office as adults.
Mm.
That's the story.
Say
Is
more. What do you mean?
I always thought that I was just the problem. I created a lot of problems for my parents because I was so difficult. I had trouble, with making friends, or I wasn't able to integrate with in the neighborhood. And I always thought it was just me. And then I found out that I'm autistic. And then I realized, oh, oh my goodness, my family kind of just missed me. And I had
Yeah.
no idea. And now I understand that it wasn't just me. And maybe if there would have been more, because I don't like to blame parents. In many cases, parents are doing the best they could, but maybe if they understood that it wasn't just like I was rigid and defiant, but I had a certain way of thinking and perceiving, including some very narrow ways of seeing things that were part of my brain wiring.
Yeah.
Maybe they would have connected with me differently. Maybe we would have had a different outcome in a different relationship. That's what I
Mm.
hear that's what comes up in my office.
Yeah, it brings me a lot of heartache to hear that from
Yeah.
that story, from that lens. Makes me think this work actually needs to be taught to young new parents.
Yeah, there's a lot of really parents. I see a lot of parents too, and
Uh-huh.
they appreciate being able to understand their child through these different. It actually takes some of the pressure off of them as well. It's like, oh, it's not like I'm doing something wrong with as a parent, but that there's a way that my child is
Yes.
perceiving the world, or maybe there's a lot of times the issue is sensory issues. You'll see a lot of kids. I should speak for myself. I'll see a lot of kids who, or I don't see kids anymore, but I used to see a
Mm.
lot of children who had sensory issues, but what it looks like is a meltdown. So if you're the parent on the other side of that without knowing that there's any neurodivergence or any sensory issue, the parents start to think one of two things. Either I'm doing something wrong as the parent, and I'm not tuning in, I'm not tuning into my child. What's wrong with me? I'm not attuned. Or what's wrong with my child? Why aren't they listening to me? They're bad, they're defiant, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So when you start to understand, actually, when the sounds that your child are hearing are so loud in their ears and they can't even think straight, they might melt down. And when you figure that out and you adjust for that sensory sensitivity, the child sometimes really doesn't melt down anymore. I mean, it really shifts things. And I want to I'm always so aware of, I'm speaking in very simplistic terms. It's not that simple.
I understand. There's a lot of nuance to this, but in order for us to have a conversation about it that can go out into the world, it seems like simplifying it in some ways is actually helpful.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that, but that's good to just kind of put out there. Yeah.
Mhm. Karen, as you're talking, I'm so curious to know how you came to this work. What
Oh,
what
that's a
drew
great
you in?
question. Yeah, okay. I like that question because I asked myself that question for a while. Like,
Mm,
how did this happen that I got into this work? And the answer is, well, there's two answers. When I first thought about this several years back, I thought, well, I think there was a client that I had when I was 30, maybe 29, who at that time the diagnosis was called Asperger's syndrome. Now we just refer to autism as a spectrum and being autistic on some part of the spectrum. But
so
he,
Asperger's is completely no longer used, that phrase,
not really. I mean,
term.
I would say some people who are diagnosed with Asperger's they still identify with that diagnosis. Some of them call themselves Aspies, for instance. But these days, a person would not diagnose somebody with Asperger's. There's a narrative and a Hans Asperger, who the diagnosis is named after, colluded with the Nazis to save some of the, I'm not sure why, but colluded with the Nazis in terms of some of the people who had Asperger's were saved from the Holocaust because they were very intelligent and they had something they could contribute. That's how Hans Asperger's kind of tried to frame that population. And so, because of that story that goes along with how that term Asperger's syndrome came about, it's not a diagnosis that people really lean into much anymore. But for
Okay.
people who were originally diagnosed with that, for them, that's an identity. And so that's a different story.
Yeah,
Yes.
tell me about you. Tell me about how your
Yeah.
particular path. You had a
Yeah.
client when
I
you
had
were
a
about
client.
29, 30.
Yep. He had this diagnosis at the time was Asperger's. And he was my first client with autism. I had not had a client with autism before. He was also in his early 20s. And he was a university student at a university in DC. And he kind of welcomed me into his world.
Hmm.
And his world was definitely had a different rhythm than mine, the way he perceived the world, the details he noticed. He was highly intelligent, and he also had a certain cadence that went along with his speech. He had a lot of differences in how he would perceive social cues, and he did have difficulty connecting in meaningful ways to other people. And he really welcomed me into his world, and I was curious. And that's how I started down this path. And what I started to learn as I worked with him, we'll just call him Scott. When I worked with Scott, I would go to his dorm room. I would help him kind of with his executive functioning and staying on track, and also help him with making connections with others. But what
Hmm.
began to happen was I got really interested in this group of people with this diagnosis. It was kind of a newish diagnosis. It came out in the DSM-4 in 1996, I believe. And I started doing groups with first men and then boys who were diagnosed with this, form of autism at that time called Asperger's. And what happened is I started to realize that the family system around the children, particularly the men were a different story, but around the children were struggling. There was a lot of reactivity. There were a lot of power struggles. There was a lot of misunderstanding of what is going on with my child. They can't, from the parent's perspective, my child cannot just sort of go along to get along. Everything is a struggle, meltdowns, things like this that were not making sense. And I found that when I had family systems therapy training. That was where I was coming from. And when I worked with the system to help them understand their child and to maybe just get to know each other better, everything, the reactivity sank, and there was more connection, and they were better able to function as a family, and the child was better able to get his or her needs met. That's what happened. And then, so that's how I got into it clinically.
I
But that,
imagine that felt like you had some kind of magic power to make a real difference in the lives of these young men.
well, at the time, and these were boys and then also men,
Okay.
but at the time, so like the men was a whole different story. I was just really curious to, there were all these men that were being diagnosed with this form of autism, and they were struggling to hold down jobs. And I thought at the time, maybe if we have a group, they can connect with each other and they can be less isolated. That was my intention.
You
Um,
know, that's the number one mission behind the Relational Life Foundation is to
mhm,
address the epidemic of loneliness and
right,
isolation.
right.
And this population seems like would probably experience that more so if they're not getting seen or they're getting missed by their families even or their
Yes.
partners.
That's exactly what was happening back then in 2000 or whatever. And so that group was a special group because I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure I was the only person anywhere doing a group like that. And they did connect, actually.
Mm,
They identified with each other, and it was really powerful. Then I started working with the boys after had been working with the men. And that's where I realized that the system around these boys were really dysregulated. And as soon as there could be some regulation in the family system, the child actually started doing better. They started functioning better. They still had needs and things that they needed help with. They could navigate that better with less, conflict.
I believe
So
it.
that's how, but then I started thinking about, wait a minute, maybe there's some other thing that pulled me into this.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that I think on my father's side of the family, his dad, my father's dad, he was very, very rigid in his thinking about things. And
Mm,
I believe, as I thought about it, reflected on it more, that I grew up in a system that had a level of rigidity in it all the time. And I learned how to navigate that really well. So when I worked with like the men or the boys, I was able to navigate that and I wasn't thrown by it. And I think that is what got me sort of pulled me in at first. And then later
mm.
I thought that there's a connection there from my own family of origin that I had not really thought about before. I don't have any idea if my grandfather was autistic, I don't know, but there was a lot of rigidity in the way he thought about things. Very black and white thinker, had to have things in a very particular order,
Mm.
that kind of stuff.
Well, whether or not your grandfather was neurodiverse,
Yeah.
you benefited in a particular way that allows you to be a magic key for this population.
Hmm.
And one of the questions that I often ask guests on this show is what's the unique light that you bring to the world? What's the unique gift that you've identified in yourself that sets you
Hmm.
apart? That you say,
Hmm.
I need to bring this to the world. This is why I do the work I do.
Hmm.
And it sounds like the family of origin set you up with certain patterns and skills. But then I
Hmm.
imagine that matches with something that you already had innately within you.
I've never been asked that question, so I need to think about that. But I do think everything is connected to everything. I'm a believer in that. And I think that the idea that the people I was that were coming into my caseload as a young social worker, that they were lonely and they were dismissed and they were marginalized. And again, everything is connected to everything. I think that because I grew up in a family of immigrants who were marginalized, who were isolated, who were othered, I just think I was drawn to how can I make a difference in another group of people who are experiencing something like that because it was so embedded in the narrative of my years as a little girl growing up in a family of immigrants. And I don't mean I mean my extended family were immigrants, but they felt like my immediate family because that's how we operated. So I actually think that's more of what drew me in was just kind of part of my own story that was trying to kind of pass along the kindness and the help and the support and the ability for people to get, recognized and outside of the margins.
Hmm. As you speak that, I imagine that the work you do brings healing to the larger system of your family in some way.
Well, you'll have to ask them. So, I mean, and are you talking about like my family that I have or my family that I grew up with, or both?
Oh, I don't know. Or all people who have a similar story.
Yeah. Yeah. I do often credit my parents and my family of origin, my extended family. They taught me a lot about including people and being inclusive. And I think that some of those lessons were experienced or learned sort of the hard way, but they allowed me as a complete total American. I mean, I was born here and raised in America. They made sure that I knew those stories. They
Mm.
made sure that I wasn't distant from those stories. And I do appreciate that a lot. I think that really did influence, even though autism is not immigration, but there's a lot of
Oh.
similarities there.
Especially in your particular family, perhaps.
Yeah,
But,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, what I know about you is that your work is set out to empower people with information about how their brains are working,
Hmm.
to educate professionals in the field to be better prepared to work with a variety of brains.
Hmm.
Yeah. And to increase the awareness of neurodiversity in general and to
Hmm.
decrease ableism. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
I
it
mean,
sounds
yeah.
like what we're talking about directly fits into all four of those bullet points.
Hmm. Yeah. I also think that I'm very
Mm.
interested in couples being able to just have that relational joy that they deserve, right? So I'm very interested in getting past just survival, but also into relational joy, real intimacy, real relationships that can really repair, that can handle the ruptures and navigate. I'm really interested in all of that because I think all relationships are really fairly complex.
Mhm.
And
And they all have so much potential.
yeah,
Mhm.
and I think that there's some kind of thought out there that relationships should be a certain way, should be romantic, or should be, your partner should be able to see and hear all of you and all
You
of this
think?
kind of thing. And I'm really interested in helping people recognize what a real relationship actually looks like. And it's not pretty all the time.
No. I
So,
think that is a disservice that our culture has set up for us.
yes. And so this whole neurodiversity piece, it just adds, it does help. It's important right now because they're in the culture and this, at least in this country, and I think throughout the world, but it helps us understand that we're not just our trauma stories. We have so many layers. We need to understand all of them and we need to be relational, meaning we need to be curious about those aspects and we need to get step back from judgment and from what's better and worse than that's what I'm interested in helping
Uh-huh.
couples.
The words that are coming up for me as you're speaking are wired for connection. We're all
Mm-hmm.
wired for relationship. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the last 10, 20 years, there's been a lot more science and research that has shown us that the human brain actually really is wired for connection, that we need one
Mm-hmm.
another.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about how neurodiversity ties into that, and what that
Mm-hmm.
means in the context of neurodiverse brains.
Yeah, no, there has actually been research that shows that, well, many people know that there's research that shows we're wired for connection, but also that includes neurodivergent folks. It's not just neurotypicals who are wired for
I
connection.
believe it. But from the
So,
way that you've spoken, I get the sense that actually the neurodiverse population may have a tougher time turning toward connection or having the ability to explain their inner world so much that someone else
Yeah.
can understand and have
I think,
empathy and connect with them?
yes, I think that second piece, that's it. It's
Huh.
not always easy, or it's more complicated. Look, if you are autistic, functioning at a high level and autistic, and the way that your body, especially your face, expresses or doesn't express itself, if there's a flat or sort of a flat affect, for instance, and you're trying to connect with someone else, or they're trying to connect with you, and that other
Mm.
person is expecting an expressive conveyance of feeling and sensuality and intimacy and all this stuff, and they don't get that. Well, that person, that we'll call that person the neurotypical one, for instance,
Mm.
they can feel a sense of deep loneliness and disconnection because they're not seeing, getting through the sensory inputs of their own, that that their partner is attuning with them or tuning in. And
Makes sense.
so, but that person on the other side who may be neurodivergent actually may be experiencing love and care and concern, but is not conveying it in a way that the neurotypical partner can perceive it.
Huh.
That's where that disconnect can come in at times, and leave and actually leave both of them feeling deeply lonely. But definitely the stories that are made up about that are things like, I'm not, for the neurotypical one, you don't see me. And for the neurodivergent one, I'm I'm broken. What's wrong with me? And that those narratives can go on and on and on for years and years without any
Mm.
explanation that might be contributing to that beyond the family of origin trauma.
Uh-huh. Yeah, if they don't know to look
If they don't
at the
know to
ninth
look.
lens,
Yeah, the ninth
through
lens.
the
I
ninth
know.
lens.
Yeah.
Well, so as if you can imagine a couple in front of you that's dealing with that narrative and that pattern, that dynamic over and over the course of years,
Mhm.
how does RLT specifically help break that pattern and give them new ways to communicate?
I mean, again,
Yeah,
and I know that the audience may not know the ins and outs of RLT, so I won't get
that's
too
okay.
specific.
We're talking about
But
relational life therapy.
yeah, relational life therapy. That once we get through, so how RLT can help is several different ways. Through the process that we call phase one of the data gathering, this is very important. The model itself will support the idea of naming, hey, I just did this recently with the couple. I think you may be showing some traits that are similar to autism. And I wonder if we can explore that a bit. Would you be open to that? And the
Mm,
client said, okay. And we were able to come up with that. He's not so sure if he wants to pursue getting tested or whatever for autism, but he did understand that there were certain traits, including some ways of thinking that were a bit more rigid and less flexible than his partner's. And he was willing to look at that through that data gathering process. Then in the phase two, where we look at more of understanding the relational trauma that may be informing each person, right, on how they're reacting in the relationship, how they're showing up in a reactive state, he was able, I'm just going to use this case, he was able to understand that in his family of origin, the trauma was that he had to raise himself.
mm,
His parents were really not around. They really were not present with him. And he had to figure out how to raise himself and be self-reliant. He also, though, then understood not only did he learn how to be self-reliant, but he has this really analytical brain that made it easy for him to be self-reliant, kind of helped him along. So that phase two work of understanding the trauma and maybe how the neurodivergence is intersecting happens. And when doing that, the development of that wiser adult part is also looking at not only those adaptations from trauma, but maybe how the rigid ways of thinking or those sensory issues might also be contributing to some of the ways that the reactivity is coming across to their partner, right? So when they develop their wise adult, they're developing strategies to manage some of those traits, and they're also developing awareness about their adaptive child. But then it's phase 3 that I think really brings it home because of the tools. So, using the feedback wheel breaks everything down in terms of communication. And I have found that all of my couples who are neurodiverse love the feedback wheel.
It's a very tangible model. And I
Mhm.
want to just make sure it's clear. Breaking down communication is not a breakdown of communication, but it's actually a
Yes.
breaking down step by step. This is what happened. This is what I
Yes.
noticed, and this is how I felt about it. This is like what I
Right.
made up. This is how I felt.
Yeah,
So
that really helps
I bet.
because it helps the partners, and this helps all couples, but it really, really I've just heard nothing but positive things
Hmm.
from my neurodiverse couples who say, "Oh, this is a relief because now, let's say the neurotypical partner has had trouble. They often feel like I can't figure out what he's thinking. I can't figure out what she's thinking." And the neurodivergent one uses the model to break it down. This is what I saw and heard. This is the story I made up about it. This is how I felt, and this is what I would request. They're able to tell their partner what they're thinking or feeling because it's broken down. When it's not broken down, often, not always, but often a neurodivergent person, especially autistic, simply gets overwhelmed with all of that at once and doesn't know where to begin. So they can't communicate it.
So it's helpful on both sides, being the receiver and the communicator.
Yes. Yeah, it really makes a difference. I've
I
heard a
believe it.
lot good things. So I think that's part of it, but definitely that phase 2 where the partners are also getting in touch with how they need to show up in order to
Mhm.
take care of those parts of themselves or that part of themselves that contributes to disconnection. That's useful, but you also have to take into consideration any accommodations to some communication needs that need to come into play too.
I'm actually caught on phase 1 as you're you're in phase 3 now with teaching skills and
Right.
coaching, but in phase 1, RLT does something called joining through the truth.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about doing is saying, "Listen, what I'm noticing in you is that you might have some tendencies that show up as someone who might be
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent. Do you wanna take a look
Mm-hmm.
at that?" And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, to me, that's joining through the truth because you're
Yes, it
holding them
is.
with love, you're holding them with respect, and
Mm-hmm.
helping them see something that they may not currently be seeing in themselves.
Absolutely. That is part of joining through the truth. And this is the part that I haven't given enough light to yet. It's joining through the truth on that side of things, but also joining through the truth with, let's just call that other partner neurotypical or leaning in towards neurotypicality, that they might be making some assumptions about their neurodivergent partner, about whether they really care or not, whether they're really present or not. That comes from what we call neurotypical privilege. The privilege of being able to say it's always the other partner who has the empathy deficits, but not me, not the neurotypical one.
Ah,
So I do a lot of joining through the truth around that piece as well,
mm,
so that because otherwise, the partner who's neurodivergent is always the problematic partner, and that is not always the case
right.
at all. Yeah.
Well, you're leveling the playing field by calling out what they may
Yeah.
not be seeing.
Yeah. So it's one layer of joining through the truth, but there's also other layers, but that would be an additional layer.
Of course, there's other layers, and we don't have
Yeah.
to get into that here, but
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to name that that seems like a really clear correlation to me.
Yeah.
I love it. If you're feeling ready to take a deep dive to transform your relationships, you'll want to join us for the RLT Relationship Skills Bootcamp events. Based on the work of renowned therapist Terry Real, this workshop equips you with essential skills for building more loving, intimate connections. A recent participant said that this workshop is for those interested in deepening their understanding and experience of intimate relationships. They said, "I am very pleasantly surprised, and I feel I have practical tools to enhance my relationship with my partner." We believe that everyone deserves the tools for healthy, fulfilling relationships. And so, all relationship boot camps through Relational Life Foundation are offered on a sliding scale, making it accessible and affordable for anyone. You don't want to miss this opportunity. Visit relationallifefoundation.org or click the link in our show notes to learn more and check out dates for the upcoming events. And now, back to our program.
Well, I will tell you that when I went to do the presentation I did in Orlando about neurodiversity, it's another form of no ordinary love, but it's really about RLT and neurodiversity.
Uh-huh.
There are autistic people, neurodivergent people can absolutely be grandiose. There's no question about it. Like, that's not, they can be shame-based, one down or one up. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. They can be in either place. They can be boundaryless, they can be walled off. There's not a specific, just because you have this kind of neurotype means that you have this kind of relationship grid placement. There is no such thing. And sometimes that's what it can be very difficult when you have an autistic person who goes to a grandiose and boundaryless place in the relationship, because that's where you might find somebody who is expecting their partner to make a lot of accommodations. And it's not that they don't deserve those accommodations. It's how they expect it that gets them in trouble, right? I mean, that I would love to talk about. We'll have to have another
I
conversation.
think that can be true with grandiosity in a neurotypical couple as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. You're right. But how it shows up is like,
Mm.
the lights are too strong in here, so I can't. You're not sensitive to my sensory issues, so
Mhm.
you're the problem. As opposed to, I have sensory issues. I need to take care of those sensory issues. Hopefully, you can understand that, but it's my job to take care of that. It's not that it's your fault that you don't understand. That's not really the issue. It's, what am I doing and how am I communicating that to my partner so they can help and take care of me? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. How many other RLT practitioners are doing what you're doing? Do you know, if any?
I know a few practitioners who do neurodiverse couples work, but they
Uh-huh.
don't do RLT as far as I know. I think that could be changing as I speak because so many more people are getting certified. And also, I do teach at the Institute as well. And
Yes, you do.
I'm starting to connect with other neurodivergent RLT students, and those folks are definitely doing this work for sure. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that I should tell you about our scholarship students, because sometimes, what we're really trying to do through the scholarship is award practitioners who are diverse in some way or another and doing work with diverse populations,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
populations that have dealt with systemic oppression of one sort or another.
Mm-hmm.
And at times, we have applicants who are neurodiverse and say so in their application
Mm-hmm.
and get awarded a scholarship. And I feel like they should get to know you. They should make a connection with you within the institute.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah.
teaching. What are you teaching at the institute?
Well, I'm doing mentoring groups, and I'm about to do a practicum called Practicum 3.
Great.
So, yeah, yeah. And then the other thing I do, and I really enjoy too, in addition to the work at the Institute, I really
Mm.
love teaching. So I just enjoy it so much. I also run an RLT consultation group that's just
Oh,
my group out of my practice. It's not part of the Institute.
mhm.
But some of the students who got certified or some of the folks who've been in the work come to that group. Now, that group there is a layer of discussion around neurodiversity in that group
Great.
because
So that's
everybody knows.
specifically for practitioners.
Yes, that's for
Neat.
practitioners. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Beautiful,
So,
Karen. And I
yeah,
also know
yeah.
you're hosting a boot camp coming up, a relationship essential skills
Yes,
boot camp.
I really am excited about that. I will say it's October 10th and 11th in Ashton, Maryland. It's in person. I'm super excited. And my co facilitator, Andrea Masters, is also doing it with me.
I didn't know that.
Well, we just added her because
Great.
so that's new information, Sarah. I actually meant to tell you. So there you go. I just told you.
I love Andrea. I
Yeah,
think she's a great teacher.
she's a great teacher. I'm really excited. So we're doing it together. The boot camp itself, being very clear, it's not, the boot camp is not made specifically for neurodivergent or neurodiverse people. What will happen in my boot camp with Andrea is that I'll bring that lens and that sensitivity, but it's not specifically for neurodivergent folks. It's just that, and that's because the the curriculum, the boot camp itself was not designed in that way at this point.
Sure.
So yeah,
Not yet.
yeah, not yet. Yeah,
And through Relational Life Foundation, Karen has made a few seats available for a sliding scale donation. So if finances are a pinch point for you and you're a listener and this sounds interesting to you, check out relationallifefoundation.org. You can find her boot camp there.
yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be doing it.
I am too. Thank you for your generosity in offering the foundation some seats to sell.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for this conversation. It's actually been great and really just fabulous to kind of explore sort of how this all comes to be, how this has evolved for me, and hopefully how, you know, how, I mean, I am interested in helping practitioners become more comfortable with neurodiversity and have it not be so scary. So hopefully this has been helpful in that way.
Well, it seems essential, especially as we know that more and more and more people are learning and identifying themselves as neurodiverse. We can no longer afford to ignore this set of the population
No,
at
no,
all.
no,
Every
no.
therapist should be trained in this.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me about it. Is there anything else that feels really important to name?
I don't think so. I think this has been a great conversation, and I'm thrilled to just be able to have it with you, Sarah. Thank you.
I am too. So I want to say this, if this conversation has been interesting to you and you want to go deeper with the knowledge that Karen brings to the table, I encourage you to go check out the No Ordinary Love community conversation again on Relational Life Foundation's website. And we'll put all of these links in the show notes, but I wanted to put a plug in for that because it's a fantastic dynamite conversation with two other practitioners that Karen brought
Yeah.
into a panel.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
You bet.
And I will say, I didn't say this until now, my practice is known for two things. We're known for all of the things that we do here are relational in some way, but they're not all relational life therapy. But what we do is we do help people with different types of relationships, parent-child relationships, couples relationships. We have groups, and we work with individuals of all sorts. But we're always giving that lens of what is the system that what is the context that they're coming with. And then we're known for the neurodiversity piece. So I have an amazing team of
Hmm.
clinicians and actually just brought in a RLT certified coach to the practice as well. So
Beautiful.
yeah, yeah. So it's a rich practice in terms, we don't just do one thing. We do a lot of things and we attend to helping people in their relationships because that's where a lot of the problems show up.
Yeah, I always joke, I'm a very peaceful person on my own. Leave me
Yeah,
alone. I will be blissful and peaceful. And
yeah.
then actually the moment I became a parent and I had this little being, I'm like, oh, I'm not as peaceful as I thought when I have another person poking at me.
Exactly. Yep.
Relationships bring it all to the surface.
Exactly. Well, that's what we say here is that
Mhm.
if you go on my website, you'll see it. It says that
Mm,
the relationships are that's where things show up. So
that's right.
that's why we bring some attention to that, even if we're just working with individuals. So yeah.
My lens on it is actually that relationships are where we do our healing as well.
Yes.
It's much harder to heal in isolation, that we need other humans to poke at us and explore with us to do the deeper healing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, we actually, at my practice, we have a lot of groups for that reason. We have a parent group, we have a siblings group that is
great.
fantastic. And
Ah,
we have a
I love
group
it.
for people with OCD that who work and they heal in group. with each other. So I think that's all, yeah, that's what we do. So starobincounseling.com is where you can learn more.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Caron. It's really
Thank you,
nice to see
Sarah.
you today.
You too. Thank you for having me, Sarah.
Absolutely. Thanks for offering. Thanks for listening to this episode of Facets of Connection. This show is brought to you by Relational Life Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending the chronic epidemic of loneliness by fostering community and transforming relationships. Its mission is focused on building stronger, more connected communities through research on relational health and through accessible therapeutic services and education. If you'd like to support this work, visit relationallifefoundation.org. Your generosity helps us make relational support available and accessible to more communities. On another note, I'd love to hear from you. Whether you've taken a workshop through Relational Life Foundation, if you're working with an RLT therapist, or simply if you have a guest or a topic to recommend for a future episode of Facets of Connection. I want to know, what's resonating with you? What's shifting? Or what are you still sitting with? Send me a quick voice memo or an email to Sarah with an H at facetsofconnection.com. Your story might even be featured in a future episode. I look forward to hearing from you. Facets of Connection is created by me, Sarah Melissa Oswald. Our executive producer is Carrie Allison Maloney, and our digital producer is Kim Novak. Follow us here on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts. Thank you in advance for your support. See you soon.